I think we have the best research team in the entire world. I think we can go and hill climb any benchmark. We can go and hill climb any use case. Like, I have 100% confidence.
Gemini 3.5 Flash is the new state of the art. So it's better than the frontier models from OpenAI and Anthropic.
I'm like medium term bullish that there's going to be a lot of alpha that you can create by like spending the time doing that.
Today we're joined by Logan Kilpatrick, face of Gemini. He left OpenAI to join Google and quickly built the iteration loop between models and the real world. He's shaping where AI goes next, and he's here to tell us.
Does that say build, ship, repeat, Gemini?
Indeed.
Cool
That's
mantra.
life. Build, ship, repeat. Gemini is what it feels like. It's the flywheel.
Logan, so glad to have you on the bench. Thanks for joining me.
I'm excited. It's going to be a fun conversation.
Yeah, we were just chatting, but before we get into the details for this new model, Gemini Flash 3.5, I actually wanted to show you an email exchange, which we dug up between my co-founder and a member of the Gemini team about 2 years ago now. Let me get this up. So this is an interaction related to many model releases ago, Gemini 1.5 Pro, which we had access to, but unfortunately, rate limits were way too low. It's like Langston believed it would take 20 days for us to run our full eval suite on that endpoint. And so requested higher rate limits, jumped in, asked us to fill out a form. We filled out the form, curious when we were going to hear back on higher rate limits, and then heard back that once the model was made public, the recommended advice was to start multiple projects, get multiple API keys, and actually cycle between those API keys to have the level of output which we wanted to see. So obviously we're in a completely different world. I think it was actually around the time that you joined the Gemini team, April 2024. So I was curious what the state of the team was when you got there was, and what needed to change to resolve a lot of these problems today.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we could talk for a long time on this. I think the short answer to this story is like, we sort of had stuff to do across the whole stack. It was like we had to build the infrastructure, to be able to give people higher rate limits, et cetera. We had to build better models. We had to sort of like get the flywheel from an ecosystem going. And so we've been sort of pushing all of these things in parallel for the last 2+ years now. And it's actually really exciting to see the level of progress that we've been able to make. Also because, on some of these infrastructure things, like we have been doing it in a way that is more difficult to do in the short term, but hopefully pays down a lot of benefit in the long term. Like, for example, for customers getting API keys and all this stuff today, all this infrastructure behind the scenes is actually using the Google Cloud infrastructure. We've built on top of Google Cloud so that customers sort of coming in and using the Gemini models, if they decide to upgrade and use some other service inside of cloud, they don't need to like go and reset up an account and do all this stuff. It's like everything's already been taken care of for them, a billing account, a project, API key, et cetera. And so it was definitely the path of most resistance, but I think has paid off in just sort of building this better ecosystem effect that we've built. And same thing on the model side. Like, just I think you were alluding to earlier. I'm wearing the shirt that says build, ship, repeat Gemini, which is sort of like literally the cadence that we go through. And we have like a bunch of these tote bags actually in the office, which sort of have the whole sequence actually starting from April of like all the different Gemini model releases to like get to the point of where we are today. And it's I think a great testament to Google's willingness to ship and like continue to do this iteration. I think it's like really hard to do, especially given sort of everything that's happened from like a macro climate perspective. But my personal opinion is like, I think it's a competitive advantage that we're willing to continue to ship and continue to iterate. And so, yeah, hopefully our customers see the sort of like fruits of that ultimately.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's good to get models out there and get them in the hands of people, even if the infrastructure will take longer to catch up. And to your point, building it on GCP means that you can hopefully in the long term take advantage of all the infrastructure that Google's known for.
I think we're just starting to see that story play out. So I'm excited. I think like the rest of this year and into next year, I think you start seeing like a bunch of really interesting things that only we can do because of this bet that we made. And so I'm very excited. I think it'll be cool to see.
That's a good teaser. I mean, I think even some of the announcements in I/O were announced and have a delay to being deployed and in the hands of people. Do you think that infrastructure is still a bottleneck for realizing the intelligence research is coming up with?
Yeah, which announcement specifically? Because I think the answer varies depending on what it is that you're talking about.
I think there were some products like the Spark experience and Omni.
Yeah. So Spark's a good one. Spark's been like a huge sort of like obviously the sort of the open claw moment happened. I think that team has done an incredible job of sort of building a really interesting ecosystem. In order to like truly productionize experiences like open claw, really difficult to do. I think there's just like a lot of things that need to be built. It takes time. Infrastructure is definitely part of it. I think just like also the you know, getting a sense for these like new, as agents finally start working, quote unquote, like what actually is the bar? Like what working means to you is different than what it means to me is different than what it means to like somebody building this product inside of Google. And so I think just like us having a really deep understanding of like where are the use cases where this thing is actually successful versus not. I think Spark is like actually actively rolling out right now, and hopefully by the end of this week will be available to all the Ultra customers. So that one hopefully won't be like too far into the future as far as like an actual release goes.
Awesome.
We were just slightly off. It's hard. Shipping products is difficult when you're like, you have to, do something on a specific date, because actually a lot of this stuff is like foundationally research. And so like the research pipeline is oftentimes like not something that you could just like easily put a date on. You're like mid some research thing happening, and then you have code freezes and a bunch of stuff that happens before, and so it's a difficult timing sequencing. And so I'm very excited to not have any like hard, you have to do a thing or say something on some specific date. It just gives us a lot more breathing room from how we bring these products to the world for our customers.
Yeah, totally get that. Well, before we get into the new model release, I was curious to try and flip this as well. What do you think is there some kind of tip or hack you have for people using the Gemini model for them to extract extra juice? What's the rotating keys of 2026 that people can do to get more out of the platform?
I think we get lots of feedback on this from the ecosystem that like Google has lots of products. And so I do think like one of it's sort of maybe like corollary to the sentiment of Google has lots of products and it's sort of difficult to navigate. But actually a lot of the products, my feeling as somebody who's like just tries to play with everything and see what's happening, is there is so much beauty in how deep some of these products have gone. And you look at like Stitch as an example for like designing stuff. You look at like Pumpelly and other labs product for doing a bunch of like marketing things. You look at Flow sort of like being this AI native creative suite for folks who want to sort of bring content to life. These products actually like go really deep. And so I think there's a lot of alpha in this like specialized vertical product suite that exists. And it feels like those are, again, despite the narrative that folks are sort of sometimes frustrated by too many products, Google existing, like I'm actually happy in a lot of cases that these products exist despite this tension, because it lets us really go deep and see like what would like the very AI native version of this product actually look like. And those things are really hard to do on these like large surfaces like the Gemini app or Google search, or even like Workspace has like multi-billion users. And so I think these like very deeply AI native products are sort of where there's like lots of alpha in the Google ecosystem these days. So play around with those. And I feel like most of them are like free, or, you can use with your, $20 a month Gemini subscription, whatever it is. So there's lots of alpha.
Yeah, use all the tools. Use Julius and Gemini CLI and anti-gravity and everything.
Exactly. I think the developer tooling stuff, I think we're definitely having more, and we saw this at IO, there's like definitely more consolidation happening just to sort of, help sort of bring more clarity for folks in the developer ecosystem. So I'm excited about that.
Cool. Let's get into the new model release. I think this got a lot of attention over the last week, and it seems like it's going to become embedded in a lot of how people interact with Gemini, because it's the new default model in a lot of surfaces. I'm curious from your perspective, if there is any key headline or takeaway you think that people should have when they receive this model.
Yeah, well, I think one is, I mean, definitely see all the feedback. I think folks have lots of comments about sort of, where the model sits from a quality perspective, where it sits from a price perspective. So the team, I think one of the best things, and I think people think that somehow this stuff is controversial and that feedback is bad or something like that. But like, I think one of the best parts of shipping models is like you get signal from the real world. We think that this model is going to be great. Of course, Google's not building every product, and so we don't actually know how it's going to play out across all these different domains. It's why benchmarks are really useful as sort of a proxy for some of this stuff. But ultimately, like the real test is shipping and bringing the model to customers. And so it's been awesome to see the reception sort of in every form of the feedback that's been coming in so far. The headline to me, as far as what this model is capable of, um, and I think this is maybe not the narrative that is the most prevalent right now, but I think if you look at the Flash model over time, Flash has historically been this like very cost effective sort of, lower intelligence sort of workhorse model that is driving sort of a lot of the daily use cases. And it's powered, the Gemini app and features and functionality across search and a bunch of other places. Um, and I think some of the reception to the 3.5 Flash model is, hey, this seems like a different model. This seems like a different category of model than what we've historically gotten for Flash. It's a little bit more expensive. It sort of thinks more, et cetera, et cetera. And I think maybe the part of the story that we sort of were implicitly telling, but we didn't say explicitly, is like, this is by design. It's by design that this model looks different. It's by design that the model is sort of like more intelligent in different ways. And it's because the sort of day-to-day workflow of how people are engaging with these models is changing. Like the sort of low intelligence, sort of et cetera model that, was super, super cheap, is obviously still important, but is not what you use to power a bunch of these like agentic product experiences. And sort of as agents, permeate into the world and do all this stuff, like I think about this almost as like rebasing the Flash model series for this new era of agents. And like it requires a model with a different set of trade-offs. And like, again, hopefully the cost will go down over time and it'll, all those things will happen. But like, this is the first crack at that. And I think it's important to have that perspective. And I'm happy we're doing it, because ultimately, like, if we decided not to and go in a different direction, I think it would be bad for Google, it would be bad for our customers. And so I think it's important that we like build this, like, what does the deeply native agentic model look like? And then actually continue to scale that up for Pro at sort of the frontier of all these things.
Got it. Yeah, and I think a lot of this is borne out in the benchmarks as well, where I think there's a belief that the frontier or like the ceiling can continue to be pushed, and that realizes a level of improvement for the everyday models, but also that the expectations continue to go up as people become familiar with a certain AI experience. They're hungry for and crave for more, and so that means that the baseline also has to improve to keep up with expectations. To shift into some of the benchmarks, the one that really blew me away was this result on our FinanceAgent benchmark. So this is posing questions expected of entry-level finance analysts across the models. And we actually see that Gemini 3.5 Flash is the new state of the art. So it's better than the frontier models from OpenAI and Anthropic. And you can dig into this website and see a lot of the results across different categories. But in particular, when we investigated, what we found is that the model is just a lot more persistent. So looking at a single question trajectory between the 5.5, Opus 4.7, and then this new Flash model, we see that performance is pretty stark, but we also see a massive drop off in the number of steps and tool calls that the model is making in comparison to others. So we see Gemini 3.5 Flash taking 82 steps, doing 81 calls, compared to 5.5, which is 13 steps and 48 calls. And so I was curious if this was by design, that the model, as you intended to release it, is just a lot more persistent and capable as an agent compared to what else is out there.
Yeah, and I addressed sort of some of this, the comments around this on X, because I think folks have had lots of comments and questions about this. It is definitely by design to a certain degree. I think historically folks have had a lot of feedback about like Gemini being lazy, and sort of you would ask it to do something, it would sort of, generate 1,000 tokens, and sort of that was the end of the road as far as what the model was willing to do. And so I think we've like taken a bunch of that feedback to heart and like tried to figure out like, how do we make the agent or how do we make the model sort of like more willing to like go deeper and do more work and actually fully accomplish the task. Again, historically, like even I think like the 3 Flash model would be like, okay, I've sort of done some of the initial scaffolding work and like now I'll hand it back off to you or something like that. And sort of you don't see as much of that behavior from 3.5 Flash, which I think is great, because I think people are ultimately, again, through this lens of it's a deeply agentic model. You want it to actually go and be able to do a task if it's been instructed and asked to do a task. there's definitely like a token efficiency pass that I think will happen for this model and sort of like the next iteration. So I think we know the model's like a little bit probably too over eager, and like it could definitely be more token efficient in order to achieve some of these tasks. So we've seen a bunch of examples of this already, and it's something that's top of mind from a model perspective. But on the margin, I think it's like positive to take the step forward to like get out of this laziness world and sort of move towards the world where like the model is really trying to actually do the thing with persistence that you see it do. And I think it's actually another like interesting macro question of sort of just like model personality characteristic trade-off stuff. Like you kind of want, or at least, ideally, actually, you want to give people the choice of this, but like the model having this ability to go and be persistent when instructed to, I think is actually like a really useful characteristic. And on the margin is like probably better than it not having that characteristic. So I'm excited that we have it. And yeah, it will hopefully get more efficient over time though.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reminded I had a math class in undergrad. It's a probability class, and I remember the professor. He laid out a very detailed process for solving a certain class of problem, but then he also would sometimes caveat it by saying things like, "But if you want to go out and enjoy the California sun, this is the other approach, or this is like the shortcut version for what it takes to get the answer." And I think obviously you want models that are persistent, can understand deeply how to do the task at hand, but they're also looking for shortcuts. They're looking to go out and enjoy the California sun.
I
Um,
love that analogy and expression. That's great. Actually, I'm gonna borrow that. It's a good one.
yeah, I mean, I think it's probably representative of the lazy smart attitude of how do you do the minimal set of things possible because you're so smart you don't really want to spend your time or tokens towards that task. So maybe that's the next level of improvement we'll see across the board in some of these models. But and as you're getting at, I think some of this tool call usage and token usage can come at a price. Interestingly, this also saw a price increase on an input and output token basis. Can you talk through where that kind of decision comes from and why that's justifiable for the people interacting with the new Gemini models?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Again, there's been lots of comments and feedback about this. I think the sort of like simple answer to this is like we want to price Gemini relative to how much value we think that it delivers. And so like the model price is inherently based on that. And I think in a bunch of the analysis that we've been doing sort of prior to the model launching, and obviously it's helpful to have all this sort of ecosystem feedback and like see even more benchmarks and more real world customer use cases, because it's definitely like a proxy of the broader ecosystem. I think what we were seeing is like the cost of intelligence, like basically continued to go down even at this price. It's also just takes more to sort of bring this model to life. Yeah, the model is also sort of trying to approximate like probably more of like the sonnet level of intelligence, which I think like historically Flash has been like in a different cat. It was sort of like the haiku GPT mini series intelligence. And so I think we wanted it to sort of like take a step up again, actually back to the main point, because a bunch of these agentic use cases actually require a model with that level of intelligence. And that's a sort of set of use cases that we were really excited to go after with the Flash model. Not only again in our own products, but also the ecosystem products. So I think lots of trade-offs, like trying to find the right setup to sort of be in that category, which is interesting. And I feel like there actually isn't a lot of other models in that category, which I also find interesting. I think it's like Sonnet and hopefully 3.5 Flash are like sort of the only two models in that category. Um, so yeah, and again, the feedback is helpful. I think the pricing all continues to evolve over time, and it changes on every model iteration. But trying to price it for the value and also like where it sits quality wise, I think was the intent.
Yeah, I think this is something that I also struggle to wrap my head around how pricing for these API or intelligence-based products should be constructed, especially because there's so much variability between the unit of tokens and the actual output that's produced for different tasks. And so you could imagine there exists a sequence of tokens that produce an S1 or create a new application which people are buying, which is a lot more lucrative. It actually should per token be a lot more expensive to create. But compared to my emails that I draft or the very simple one-line code changes that we have to make on an intelligence or like output basis are not that valuable, but just cost the same because we're dealing in a shared unit of tokens.
Yeah. It is it's an interesting observation. I think you're right about this. I think I'll add one sort of like nuance to this, which is I think it's actually a feature that this exists in the way that it does. And I think why that's the case is because it creates alpha for people building on top of the models. I think if you were to like if Google was to go like try to do the like perfect approximation of like and maybe this will happen in the future. I don't know. I think it's probably hard to pull off in practice, but I think on the margin, if you could perfectly approximate the economic value that you're creating with a set of tokens and charge for it, I think it sort of undercuts a bunch of the opportunity for the startup ecosystem who are like doing the hard work of trying to answer that question. And so again, maybe that will happen in the future and like the model will just know like, oh, I'm doing something economically beneficial and thus like, here's how much it should cost to do that versus, these are just like basic tool calls that I'm like trying to check my thing. And so I need to check, what files I have available to me. And so therefore this should be cheaper because it's not that beneficial. But yeah, I think there is an interesting story of like this being it's a feature for the ecosystem. And then companies do the sort of like, the Harveys of the world, they are pricing in like what's the economic value of creating an S1 for a company. Yeah.
Exactly. I think that means there'll likely be arbitrage or continued arbitrage for people assembling tokens in a smart way and not just being purveyors of those tokens. Um,
Yeah.
plus,
And it feels like it's going to be really hard to change that equation. So I'm like medium term bullish that there's going to be a lot of alpha that you can create by like spending the time doing that. And also like coming up with the workflows and the setup that, you use like a multi-model setup that sort of creates value in ways that like wouldn't have been possible out of a single model, for example, is like another version of that, which I think is super interesting.
right. Just to round out our Flash conversation, I think something that I was surprised not to see be talked about more was the model's ability as in coding and programming. When we look to our benchmark, our vibe code bench, um, we actually see that it's a pretty considerable jump above the last Flash model. So the last Flash model is getting around 20%, it's on 20 rank of 23. But then this one's a big jump now, getting 48% and getting 10th place, so cracking the top 10, and also big jump above Gemini 3.1 Pro. And just for context, this is a benchmark measuring models' ability to take a natural language spec sheet and build a full stack web application. So go from 0 to 1. We also see that on SweBench and Terminal Bench, the model's getting third place, just behind 5.5 and Opus 4.7. So top 3 performance there. And then we have recently implemented Program Bench. It's going to be coming to our site soon. And we actually see that it's really strong there to top 10 performance, especially surprising considering how affordable the 3.5 model is compared to these others. And so I'm curious, kind of two part. One, where do you expect to see people using this new Gemini model for what types of jobs? And what does it take to continue to push the frontier? It seems like the gap is really narrowing. So would expect that to continue. What does it take to close it?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Well, very interesting. I hadn't seen Program Bench before, but it is cool to see. I think also the part of the story, which oftentimes, and I don't know what latency is exactly measuring in this context, this like the end to end to do a test.
Yeah, this one's actually rebuilding a program. So trying to, and this is from input to output, the full agentic execution.
Interesting. Very cool. Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of agentic use cases I think are one, and then also specifically coding I think is the other. And so we've spent a huge amount of time dogfooding this model inside of Google for coding, and like there's many engineers across Google using this to like write code and build. And so I think you get a lot of that feedback for sort of long horizon tasks. And I think those are probably like the two things that there was like a big push on trying to close the gap to your comment about sort of where the frontier is. I think there's also just things that Gemini has like naturally always been really good at. Multimodal is one of those. And so I've seen a bunch of people sort of doing this like agentic multimodal use case, which is really cool. That continues to be really, really good. Um, so yeah, I think those two are perhaps the biggest, and then folks are like still finding the interesting edges of like where. I think the interesting thing is like where it skews and like where the sort of jaggedness is, and I think that's where the sort of next step will be really interesting, is like how to sort of smooth out that jaggedness across the model for some of these use cases. Like I think, and again, this was the same for like 3.1 Pro. Like people love 3.1 Pro for front end web design. It's like really, really good at that use case. I think it's probably still like close to state of the art compared to the other models. Maybe 5.5 has like closed some of the gap now. But I think what happens is you end up seeing you want it for coding at least to like go more than just being great for front end design. It needs to sort of do the full spectrum. And I think that's the part that we're like just getting this like flywheel spinning in the right way. And you start to see that I think with 3.5 Flash, and hopefully we'll see this even more so with 3.5 Pro. So it's exciting. I feel like it also feels like the gap isn't narrowing universally. And again, I think that goes back to this like jaggedness. I think we're like catching up in a lot of places, and there's obviously places where we're perhaps making less progress on. Again, a lot of this actually comes back to the benchmark story, which is like, what are you measuring? How are you quantifying? Like, what are the things that are getting better over time? What are the things that are not? And making sure that there's like good sort of like coverage across like real world use cases, I think, is another version. Like, I think this model also is probably like the this model rev, like the entire rev was probably like the most tested model I think that inside of Google prior to launch that we've done in the past. And so I think there's like lots of feedback about like the model not being good for real world use cases. And I think like whatever those edges are that folks have, like we definitely feel those things ourselves because we're using these models all the time. And so that feedback is definitely flying back into the flywheel, which is really helpful.
What's to account for that? So was that an intentional effort to do more testing for this release in particular?
For sure. I think part of what's to account for it is like Google's suite of products have now just like become more AI native over time. And historically you'd like have to sort of like be really intentional about like, okay, how do I, use Gemini in my workflow of whatever it is that I'm doing? Like now it's baked into our coding products. It's baked into our productivity suite. I think Sundar shared um, like the AI token volume for internal users is like doubling week over week or every other 2 weeks, whatever it is. And so I think all of that is like great. So like people are just spending more time using the technology because our products, similar to the ecosystem, have like caught up and now have these things like baked in. And so you can do a bunch of really interesting like testing flywheel with, the many, many people who work at Google doing lots of very, very different tasks and jobs as well, which is helpful.
I'm also curious to hear more generally, how do benchmarks and some of these tests define what areas Google prioritizes and the places where you all invest?
Yeah, I think there's definitely like thoughts as far as like what people want the models to be good at. I think, and then there's the next level of fidelity of like what benchmarks are we actually going after and like trying to use to approximate. And then also, I think maybe is like a newer thread of this, like how do we get better fidelity? I think like historically, Gemini has actually been really good at benchmarks. And again, the feedback has been like it sort of has fallen more flat in some of these real world use cases. And I think part of this is just like, what is the modern or what is sort of like the previous era of academic benchmarks? What were they actually covering? And the reality is a lot of them were sort of covering something interesting, but like the something interesting they were covering was not the way that people were using models in a day-to-day AI workflow. And so I think we're getting into a new era of sort of benchmarks where a lot of the new sort of benchmarks are covering a lot of these use cases that customers are actually using at the same time that the ability to like do live experiments and sort of like see that fidelity of data has just like gotten better. There's better observability, there's better tooling, there's all these things, which I think is also really positive because ultimately like if you can't measure models and like measure progress on models by training new checkpoints, and it's like really, really difficult to actually make progress. And I think it's actually one of the like existential risks for AI progress in general is like, what are you actually hill climbing on? I think is this like foundational question that I think folks need to answer. And my sense for DeepMind is like, if there's something to hill climb on, I think we have the best research team in the entire world. I think we can go and hill climb any benchmark. We can go and hill climb any use case. Like I have 100% confidence. The important question is like, is the thing that you're benchmarking actually representative of what customers are using the models to do? And I think there's historically been a gap between those two things. And I think as the gap continues to shorten, you'll actually see um, you'll see better models making it out into the world, simply not because like we got smarter people and there wasn't smart people before or something like that. It's because like you actually the gap between benchmark and reality closes because of this new era of benchmarking that we're in, which I think is awesome.
I mean, this is really what we're working on at Val's, and you see that in prior versions of benchmarks, things like looking at preference data on a crowdsourced basis or these really contrived academic tasks. They were useful for one phase of model progress, but they're no longer good signals for actually figuring out what intelligence is. And I think it's actually you point this out as an existential threat. I mean, I think it's one of the few really important questions left in AI to answer, because if we don't have the right answer to what is intelligence, we're going to optimize for the wrong things.
Yeah.
And I think to your point, the DeepMind team has proven out that if you call intelligence becoming state of the art or superhuman at playing Go, you can actually do that in a very short time horizon. And so it's just a matter of identifying what the right optimization is for us to be able to build towards. Um, I think this is also I get the sense more externally that OpenAI and Anthropic feel this existential threat a lot more acutely. Like they feel this race to ASI, and if they're not going to get there first, then it's not going to be built in quite the right way that's humanity will benefit from. But I don't see that kind of rhetoric coming from DeepMind, and so I'm curious if that ambition is not felt the same way, or if it's just a different aesthetic towards the same goal.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, obviously, Demis and the DeepMind team like basically created all of this. So I'm often reminded of that like we would not be here as an ecosystem if it was not for Demis and the team like having a bunch of these ideas and trying to bring them to the world in the way that sort of they were brought to the world, and ultimately inspiring the team at OpenAI and Anthropic to sort of go after this problem as well. Um, I think the different lens of this, and I think this is actually really healthy, is more so grounded on the relationship that these companies have with the world and sort of where they are in their standing. I think we could have like a very long conversation about this, but my quick perspective is like Google has a very unique position in the ecosystem. And I think the way that we go about building technology, the way that we go about telling the world the story of the technology that we're building, um, both with customers and for customers I think is just like in our own way. And I very much appreciate it. I think it's not that like building AGI isn't super important and isn't a huge part of the mission, but like the way that we're going about building AGI because we're Google looks different than the way that other folks are going about this. And I think to me, actually, it's like a very, um, it's very healthy the way that I think things are set up right now, at least from a Google perspective, because like we ultimately have, I think it's like 13 billion plus user products. And so as we make AI, this like accessibility bit of it, I think is like very top of mind. And like one example of this is like 3.5 is the most widely available, this Flash 3.5 model is the most widely available model that we've sort of brought, and is actually the strongest model that we've ever shipped. And I think it's cool to like see both of those things end up being true. Like the model's available to everyone inside of the Gemini app. It's available to everyone inside of AI mode. It's available through our APIs. It's available in a bunch of other places across the Google ecosystem. And I think that's really cool. And it feels like a great example of us like delivering like literally word for word what the mission is, which is building AI responsibly and making sure it benefits humanity. And I think so that flywheel is great. I also think it's a lot of this is like, who are the leaders? And I think like Demis is obviously like deeply a scientist, and like cares a lot about like progress of AI. And like, I think he's like very, very passionate about eventually using this technology to like cure all disease. And I think like DeepMind is actually really well positioned from that perspective. And then folks like Sundar are like so grounded in like the Google products that we create and how that sort of impacts customers' lives. And yeah, it's a very unique situation. And I'm glad again that folks are like looking at it from different perspectives, but it's definitely not the way I think that OpenAI and Anthropic see the world.
Got it. I think people, well, the sheer number of consumer users plus the enterprise value of what Gemini touches is just so large. I think there is this common public perception that Google lost the ambition or didn't see the sense of urgency and was left playing catch up. But actually, I think when you look at these labs on the whole, it feels like Google is the only one that's really doing both consumer and enterprise without narrowing focus, but also doing things in video generation, real-time video generation, and robotics. And I think whereas other groups feel the need to focus and actually reduce in order to win, Google has surprisingly been able to balance a lot of parallel projects. I mean, does that ever come at odds? Or are there places where tough decisions need to get made, or you feel like it's a lack of focus that prevents Google from staying ahead for a longer period of time?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think about this all the time. I think like actually if you were to distill down the benefit of being a startup and being OpenAI or Anthropic, it should be your ability to focus. It should be actually that like no one is asking you to like go and do all these other things. The reality for Google is like there's so many products, there's so many different things that we do in the ecosystem. Like it does come at a cost, and the cost is that we end up having to do lots of stuff. I think it's worth I think there's like a really interesting like organizational side of this, which is like it's worth thinking about like what does it then take in order to actually pull off all these bets? And it takes a larger organization. It takes like many years of trying to get the configuration right so that you can like actually do innovation across the spectrum. And like these are the types of things that like they're, you know, money and all this other stuff like does not help you solve that problem faster. It just like it takes time. Like there's many things in life like pre-training that just take time. And I think about this all the time. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, if we were to like really be focused on one thing, I think obviously we could be the best in the world at it. But I think the beauty actually for DeepMind, and this is, I think about this all the time, and I'm not sure that Google gets the level of credit, and I don't think it actually matters that much. But like from a portfolio perspective, we clearly have the best portfolio. That's my sort of read of the situation. There's areas where the portfolio skews, and sort of in some areas we're sort of not at the frontier, and we're working really hard to get to the frontier because we think it's economically important and beneficial for customers, et cetera. In other areas, we're like just clearly ahead of the curve and continue to invest in those places. But on the margin, I think in aggregate, I think we have the best portfolio. Um, and I think the hope is actually that like, again, all of those things, it's not about the portfolio. It's what happens when you bring the portfolio together. And I think you see that actually, which we haven't talked yet about like Gemini Omni, but you see like what happens when you take the best gen media portfolio and bring it together into a single model with the sort of world knowledge of like base Gemini. You get Omni, you get something that like only could be done from this model that like has all these other things at the frontier. And so it's a really cool it's really cool and magical when it works. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of coordination. So it is oftentimes like not the fastest thing in the world to happen, but like when it does happen, it's beautiful. And so I think I'm hopeful we'll see more of these things. And I'm hopeful like in science, we'll see a bunch of these things of like what happens when you bring Gemini's world knowledge to a bunch of these domains that don't have models like this. Um, yeah, I think it's going to be exciting.
Yeah, I think it's really worthwhile bringing up this idea of actually bringing frontier intelligence to everyone. This being the most accessible model, and also the ambition to leverage that model to solve a bunch of the big problems we have, I mean, related to disease or maybe climate change, and that being a stated vision for a lot of the folks at DeepMind, especially early on. I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the just earlier this week the encyclical from the Pope. I'm not sure if you had a chance to read it. Um, there's one passage in particular which I'm actually just thinking of. Could try and pull it up. Yeah, this one. I don't know if you saw this, but he's basically writing, we are living through a rapid phase of transition, a change of era in which, while some are vying for the future of new technologies and others dedicate themselves to reflecting on the matter, most people are watching and waiting, observing from afar, and merely hoping for the best. Um, Interesting point that he's bringing up. I think in particular, it feels like there are folks in San Francisco and in Mountain View and on the peninsula who are really active and excited by the future that they're building towards. You see an event like I/O, and there's so many things that you can be enthusiastic about in real-time video or in these newly capable intelligent models. Do you think that there's a large portion of people who are watching events like this, but actually have a negative reaction, who feel like this is a loss of humanity and the art that is being created by AI, or loss of work and sense of purpose that comes from when new models like this are released? Maybe they don't feel the concept of pervasive intelligence, frontier intelligence in everyone's hands as a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I have, I think for sure that that's like a very widely held sentiment. I think, and actually, it's a going back to like, why is the story different for what Google is doing? I think it's actually a great example of this, like, because we have so many products that touch the lives of so many different people. I think like the way to go about building this technology and also like telling the story of the technology is different. Obviously, I think like IO is, IO is like one point in time, and I think it's important that we sort of like tell the AI progress story. And so it's definitely a little bit more like AI enthusiast focused than I think the like, the majority of stuff should be. But I think part of this story is like people are lost in the sauce, sort of like talking about the technology. And the thing that actually matters, the thing that truly is impactful for people is like how the product helps improve their lives. And so I think like, I think we actually did more this year at IO of trying to tell this story of like, here's how these products actually help improve your lives. It's not about AI, like AI is a conduit to that. But like, Google search, the way that you were getting value from search and from the Google Workspace suite and from all these other things has actually historically been AI. Like the transformer was a central part of how, search was working since its inception. And the story is not about AI and search. The story is like you getting access to the information that you need so that you can make educated decisions in your life. And I think we're in the era of the technology where people are like very excited and focused on the technology. And that matters for a certain cohort of people. But I think the long tail of people just want to do the things that they are excited about doing in their lives, and to have tools to sort of help them solve the problems. And so I try to remind myself of that and read as much of the sentiment as humanly possible, because ultimately that is the reason the tools are being built. The tools are not being built because we want AI to sort of, AI for AI's sake. It's AI for the sake of putting it in the hands of people to do the things that they want to do in life, and accelerate the things that they want to do and take away the things that they don't want to do and have sort of be able to outsource those to AI or to other systems. And so, um, on the margin, I'm very excited from like a technology perspective, but I do think this like my prediction is we'll see the story sort of shift of the story that's being told across the ecosystem, because I do think there's lots of folks who are sort of like showing up now and sort of seeing the technology and being like, I don't care. Like, this isn't the story that's interesting to me. The story that's interesting is this other thing that I'm passionate about. And for sure, AI is going to play a part of that story, but like the AI bit is not what they care about.
Got it. Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity in getting AI right, and in particular, using it as a force to empower people. But sentiment matters so much, and if people don't feel like there's something that's going to be a net good for their lives, they're going to be more reticent adopters of it. And so I think the googliness attitude of how models get released or product get released may not land very well with a lot of people, but I think time will have to tell how it actually plays out.
Yeah,
Um,
we'll see how it plays out. I'm interested, and I think I take this super seriously. I'll give you like one example, and I'm always trying to like share the positivity of this story. Um, one example of this is at IO, we launched the ability to like build native Android apps directly in AI Studio, and in like less than a week, 250,000 people went and built native Android apps in AI Studio for free, and were able to do that. And I think about like the number, and we don't have, this is me guessing on the number of folks, but I would assume probably like 99+% of these folks had never built an Android app before, and probably were never going to build an Android app before. And this is like a great example of like the means to do this historically would not have been possible. You were just like out of that market. If you were somebody who like wasn't coding and building in this ecosystem, you were just never going to build that. And it fundamentally has like raised the floor for people who want to be able to like build themselves an app, or build a friend an app, or build somebody in their family an app who like needs something, to keep track of whatever the thing is in their life. I saw somebody like mention this online, talking about their, wife was pregnant, and sort of like keeping track of a bunch of the things that were happening in their lives, and like literally built themselves a native Android app in order to do this, which is really, really cool. That story to me is just like so empowering, and is also like doesn't take away from the expert who sort of does build Android apps for a living. Like it really is like additive. It's like the AI technology, like increasing the size of the pie and the market and the ecosystem. And I think we just need to tell more of those stories loudly, in a way that sort of hopefully resonates with folks. Because I think it like is so obvious that this ends up creating like huge amounts of value for the long tail of folks who, again, like were never going to build something like that before. And there's like, and other examples: remove Android app in AI Studio, replace it with something else. And there's just like so much cool stuff like that happening, which gets me excited. And I'm hopeful we can like tell the story that resonates with folks in that way.
Great. Okay, I know we're getting really close on time. I'd love to run through a rapid fire round if you're up for it.
Let's do it.
Okay, so these are going to be questions that hoping against in 30 seconds or less. First, do you think really good AI users look more like engineers, editors, or managers?
I think today engineers, because I think there's a lot of alpha still in sort of like having a bunch of the nuanced context to tell the model what you want to do. I think this will change over time perhaps, but I think today having like technical knowledge, I think creates a lot of alpha when you're using AI coding tools specifically.
Got it. It seems like over time, as models get more intelligent, I would expect the harnesses to matter less. But it seems like now the harnesses and models are actually pretty tightly coupled. When we look at coding products, for instance, do you think over time the harnesses or scaffolds will matter more or less?
I think the model keeps eating the scaffolding. I think what we refer to as the model has continued to eat the scaffolding. I think it actually is interesting of like in this moment how much the scaffolding matters. And obviously we talked a lot about the scaffolding at Google I/O with the anti-gravity agent harness. But I think my sense is it's going to matter a lot. It's just going to be like less of the story that we're telling, because the model will just have that baked in, and it'll all sort of just be the model at the end of the day.
Got it. Okay. Do you have a Logan vibe check as new models come out, or things that you get access to and get to play around with?
That's a good question. I don't have a consistent one. I do lots of like really dumb testing. I do enjoy just like chatting with the model and seeing sort of what vibes are like. I also am like I'm too cursed these days with sort of a product builder's mindset, where all I see when I test products is like 50 things to be done differently. And so I am oftentimes trying to pull myself out of that mode and have a different mindset as I'm playing around with models and products these days.
Got it. Do you personally route between different models? Like in Gemini, do you pick which model you ask a question to?
I definitely do. I do this all the time, actually. I think interestingly, it was more difficult to do now, because the Flash model has sort of like pushed my has pushed the narrative. I historically would like take my sort of theoretically more complicated questions to the Pro model, and less complicated, faster questions to the Flash model. In this like interim state, I actually had this sort of debacle over the weekend where I was like, should I be sending this to Pro or Flash? I think probably Flash. Obviously that's an intermediary state. When the new Pro model comes, I'll be back to my sort of send the hard questions to Pro and the easier questions to Flash.
I noticed for me, it kind of becomes a I feel bad asking a pro model a stupid question. Like if I'm asking for, I don't know, a marathon training plan, I don't really want to use a pro model for that. I don't want it to judge me for misallocating all those GPU hours. Um, but
I
maybe,
do think about that too. I'm like, I know how much we need the capacity and TPUs. And so I'm like, okay, maybe I'll ask my question to Flash instead to
right.
save the TPU cycles.
Do you think that when models are released, you see that the best model wins that actually is borne out in the usage? Or do they still need to be marketed? Do you need to do more of the dev rel to get it in people's hands?
That's a great question. I think it depends how jagged the model is. And so I think, like Flash is maybe just because of sort of like the price, cost, et cetera. I think it's a model where it feels like I'll sort of be doing more of this work to sort of like help folks find the places where it does make sense. And so again, I think it depends on the model. Sometimes it's a home run and it's really easy. Sometimes, the model sort of skews in different ways because of all these different trade-offs that you're making. And so, um, yeah, I think it really depends on the model.
Got it. Okay. And last question to close out. Is there a model or general AI capability that has surprised you recently?
I think actually probably Omni. Omni is like the most recent thing that it's just sort of like clicked for me. And I think why I was so excited about this is actually like this content is perfect. I think like this content, like for a subset of people, I think will hopefully be really interesting. But I think Omni creates this like really interesting like on-demand VFX studio where like I don't think this will be the way that content happens in the short term just because it takes a lot of time in order to pull this off. But I think in the future you can imagine that this like content is like made to be like it's the same words, it's still us having this conversation, but it's just like in a really interesting creative ecosystem that sort of like doesn't diminish the value of what of the conversation that we're having, but actually like elevates it in a really unique and interesting way. And I think it sort of opened my head to just like how much that sort of like creator ecosystem is going to change as people use these tools. And again, principally like I'm like I'm not against sort of like AI content, but I'm just like much less engaged by it. And I feel like Omni is a really interesting way to sort of like keep this like truth of the content while also like making it really interesting. Like my background is a stupid little phone booth right now or whatever. And so it'd be sick if I was in some like really cool and creative place. And like I think Omni can like actually help bring that to life. And again, it doesn't diminish the value of the stuff that I'm saying. It's not changing the foundational content or me or in some way. It just sort of like makes the story slightly more interesting. So I'm very excited for that. I feel like it's going to be super cool. And I would actually love to see, I've been telling everyone that I've been doing content with, like make the intro of this episode have a bunch of Omni stuff. And I think to me, it clicks every time. I'm like, this is so cool. It's so interesting and unique and like, just like would literally not have been possible three weeks ago. Like you would have had to literally go hire like $1 million VFX studio in order to do any of this stuff for you. It's crazy.
Well, I don't know if your team briefed you. We're actually going to overlay this on Subway Surfers. So that was going to be our.
But so this is the perfect thing. Actually, this is a great example. Like I hate the Subway Surfer thing. I hate the like, playing Minecraft hop, whatever it is. Like this is literally like the 100x more native and salient way to actually bring that type of stuff to life. Like people are doing that because like by default, it's expensive to do interesting stuff visually. Like it just costs a lot of time and energy. And I think Omni like literally just flips that on its head and makes it so that like the content can feel more pure and sort of like deeply engaging without having to like try to like hack people's brains in some like weird and like not great way, which I feel like is what happens with the Subway Surfer thing.
Okay, well, let's see. We're recording this now. Haven't tried Omni yet, but if it was successful, I think let's include some Omni in this outro. If you're watching this and it's successful, you can.
You got to intro. This is how you got to pull the people in. You got to if they made it this far, it doesn't matter at that point. They're already hooked in. They're 40 minutes into the conversation.
Okay, we'll give it a go. We'll see if it lands. Well, thank you so much for joining, Logan. It's been a great conversation, and excited to see what more models and products come out pretty soon.
Yeah, no, this was a ton of fun. Thank you for having me. Hopefully, we'll have lots more of these conversations as interesting new Gemini models land across the ecosystems.
Well, I think we have to get you shirts, which is like build, ship, appear on Val's podcasts, repeat.
I like that. I'll wear the shirt if you send it to me. So
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. Yeah. I know you have another meeting to head to, but thanks so much. Talk to you later.
this is great. See ya. Take care.
Bye.